G'day everyone, welcome back to another episode of the Australian Property Investment Podcast. I'm your host, Aaron Christie David, and I run a mortgage broking business called Atelier Wealth, and we specialize in helping property investors start out and scale up their property portfolios. And on that journey, what we're all about is helping property investors make confident property decisions. And the ethos for that is underpinned by getting great guests to come on each and every episode, share their knowledge, share their wealth of information on their journey that they've achieved through successfully investing in property. And today I am so pumped to bring on who's known as the property professor, Peter Koulizos. Welcome to the show.
Thank you very much, Aaron. Lovely to be here.
Mate, it's great to have you on. Anyone that's listened to your podcast will just know that you're dripping with a huge amount of information, but also the experience that you've built over years of being in the game cannot be understated, mate. So I want to say thank you very much. For those that don't know, you led PIPA, so you're the chair of PIPA for quite some time. So that is the peak industry body for property professionals. And also you were the program director of the Master of Property at Adelaide Uni. So, I mean, your accolades, but also your reputation precedes you, mate. So I want to say thank you very much for jumping on.
Pleasure. Thank you for that lovely bio and intro.
Nah, mate, it's anyone that's listened to your podcast, we get quite a lot of people that have listened to your podcast, and I think you just deliver information in a very easy to understand way, but also having lived and breathed it yourself, you probably have a huge amount of empathy for what people are going through, having gone through different market cycles, for example, and your foray into property development. But I think one thing that you've always been really vocal on is buy and hold. And that's something that I feel like in this era of maybe trading properties, it probably gets understated about the importance of being a long-term property investor, and we'll definitely come to that. But before we do you want to share with us what I call the 3 Ps, a little about yourself personally, professionally, and your property journey, mate?
Sure. So personally, married with 4 kids. As you mentioned at the beginning, I was, up until February this year, the program director for the Master of Property at the University of Adelaide. So I've retired from that position, but I haven't fully retired. So technically I'm semi-retired because, as you can see here, I'm in an office today because I did have class today. So I've just come back as a casual tutor. So I'm not doing any more, managing of people or managing of budgets or timetables or schedules. I've just come in to do the stuff that I like, which is the teaching. I'm very keen on maintaining good physical and mental health and fitness, and I'm a keen cyclist, try and go to the gym regularly, get out and about. There's nothing extraordinary about my personal life anyway.
I don't think extraordinary. I think the fact that I've read it, people that exercise stay in like the top percentile of their age. Once you start exercising, you're 30, overall 40, for example, is where you start seeing that top percentile range. But I think when I look at most people that tend to do well, it's that investment into their well-being, health. Well, I mean, you can have all the property in the world, mate, but if your health isn't A1, then property ain't going to save you. That's for sure, mate.
That's certainly true.
Yeah, that's for sure. And your property journey, do you want to take us from when you kind of first started and how that journey's kind of unfolded over the years too, mate?
Yeah, so look, first property was purchased in my mid-20s. Before I was a university lecturer, I was a school teacher, and my first posting was out into a country town.
Yeah.
And back then, a bit like now, it was a bit hard to find property to buy and a bit hard to find property to rent, but it was actually harder to find property to rent. So we had a deposit, my then fiance, now wife. Yeah. We had enough deposit between us, so we bought a house in Ardrossan because we figured we'd be there for a while. Then bought our first investment property in early 30s.
Yeah.
And then have slowly accrued, have bought and sold many properties. But as you said at the beginning, buying and holding is the best way to make money in property. It's not necessarily the only way to make money.
Yeah.
But I think if you can hold, especially when the market is going up, as we saw during COVID, that is very rewarding. We just don't know when that big peak's going to come, so you have to hold for the long term to capitalize on that benefit.
Yeah. Okay. So, I mean, you mentioned you bought and sold. What were the reasons that you maybe sold? Is it choosing to
Yeah.
sell a property, or what's the reason there, mate?
Well, main reason was because I've got 4 kids.
Yep.
And when you've got 4 kids, you need a big house. So we often sold investment property to upgrade to a bigger and better home.
Yeah.
So we did that twice.
Yeah.
Other times I've sold investment property to buy better investment property, like when I say better, generally better located investment property.
Yeah.
But I'm 62 now. I plan to. I have multiple properties.
Yeah.
I plan to sell 2 more and put that money into super, but the rest I'll be holding. And when the super runs out, I'll be living off the rental income.
Congratulations. So, I mean, looking at that number, you probably 30 years ago, and I say that to people, I'm like, imagine buying a property 30 years ago in, say, I don't know, you know parts of Sydney quite well, like Coogee, for example, all those years ago, that people thought buying them was expensive. Fast forward 30 years, and it's like, that was a no-brainer. You would have bought more of them if you knew, right? So,
Yeah, the classic example I use in Sydney is Balmain, because Balmain has gentrified, which is something that I'm really keen on. You imagine buying
yes,
a Balmain before it became popular.
don't even.
Holding.
Mate, great. I think my parents actually looked at it, and it was so blue collar. It was like, I think minor cottages, and it was like coal workers that were living in Balmain. And the migrants, they thought that's what we left the country, left our homeland for. Needless to say, that was a bad decision. But yeah, I mean, we'll come to gentrification in a second. But yeah, someone like Balmain, where you go, look, and I have two. I mean, you're down the track when your kids are a little bit older, but I speak openly about. I've got a 2-year-old and a 4-year-old. I think if we think buying property is hard enough now, imagine what our kids are going to go through and their kids. And so it will become a generation of have and have nots, where parents have either put down roots and financially been able to save themselves, and then in turn be able to help their kids. And we see that with the bank of mum and dad. There is an unfair advantage that people have access to the bank of mum and dad or guarantor loans compared to those children that are trying to buy it now that just don't as well.
Yeah, so when you look at more mature property markets, buying your own home, people don't even dream about it. That goal was around decades ago. Places like in Europe, for example, some of the major capital cities in Europe, people just don't even think about it, because unless your parents leave it to you, it's just not going to happen. And I'm sure over time, similar things will happen in Australia, but that's a long way away.
Yeah, it is a long way, but I mean, you think about it, I feel like there's people that are just going to be stuck on the rental trap that just can't see a way out. So they're going to be generation renters, and I mean, you know this from property economics, which is when you get towards, say, retirement age, and you talk about yourself being semi-retired. Imagine if you didn't have your own home, therefore you don't have the security, therefore you don't have that ability to put down roots, and you're at the mercy of a landlord. That just, to me, I'm like, that is the strong enough message to be able to buy your own home and get into the market, because down the track, it just leaves you vulnerable to market changes.
Yeah, well, look, you mentioned a classic number there, which was 30 years ago. Imagine if I bought a property 30 years and 1 month ago, I'd have no mortgage today, right? But somebody who was rented is still paying rent today.
That's right.
And unfortunately, you got to pay rent until the day you die. So even though generally a mortgage, especially in the beginning, has higher repayments than rent, in the end, in the medium and to long term, you'll be much better off.
Yeah, correct. Would you touch on what you mentioned before around gentrification? You've done a thesis on gentrification, and I've listened to a few of your podcasts as well where you talk actively about it. So for those that aren't aware or maybe unclear, the actual definition of gentrification, I'd love for you to take us through that as well, please, Ben.
Yeah, sure. Gentrification means different things to many people, but the definition I used is one that was originally used back in the 1960s, when a lady called Ruth Glass noticed that the gentry, which is where the word gentrification comes from, were moving into some of the not so desirable parts of London, but in particular, they were moving into those lovely character period heritage style properties.
Right.
And that's the definition that I use. Some people use income indicators, other demographic indicators, but mine's quite simple. It's basic. Look, in raw terms, it's where wealthier people move into a blue collar area and turn it into a blue ribbon area.
Great summary. And exactly that you mentioned, for those that living in Sydney will know Balmain. I mean, it's all the cafes. It's the bicycles have right away, for example, it's right on the water. I think it ticks all the boxes from a gentrification perspective. You mentioned Paddington inside Sydney as
Paddington's
well.
another one, yeah.
Yeah, and those that know it.
In more recent times, you've got Erskineville,
Yep.
which has been through that process. Newtown,
Yep.
yeah, a lot of good examples in Sydney and in Melbourne and in Adelaide, and in those three cities, it all happens to be the inner western suburbs, because typically that's where the workers lived. The bosses lived in the eastern suburbs, as in the bosses of the factories and, you know, all the businesses back then.
Yeah.
But then over time, you know, basically they were quite similar properties. Yes, they were smaller in the west because they catered for the workers, whereas in the east they might have been bigger, catering for the bosses. But in the end, you know, character home, just a few kilometres from town, is what people are looking for. Yes, they ideally want to live in the east, can't afford to. Well, the west is the place to go.
Yeah, nice one. And then there's a difference. So you take an area like, maybe familiar with it, like Zetland, for example, maybe even Chatswood, and people think, oh, that area is gentrifying, but actually it's what you would call urban renewal.
Yeah. Right? So gentrification, again, in simple terms, is it's an old area where you keep the old and make it new again.
Yeah.
Whereas urban renewal could be an old area, but you knock it all down and make it new. Yeah. So it's very different. Yeah. So Zetland's a good example. Chatswood's a good example. Alexandra is another example where they've knocked down what used to be there and just built high-rise apartments.
Yeah. Okay.
You know, that's just, that is urban renewal. That's not gentrification. The key to gentrification is you need to keep the older style buildings and renew them. Yeah.
Okay. So if an investor's kind of trying to find the early cues for gentrification, because that's obviously where that price growth starts to accelerate as well, what are the early warning signs that you'd be looking for?
Right. So there are some demographic ones. So those people interested in doing the stats and looking at ABS.
Yeah.
It's a decrease in the percentage of people aged 18 years and under as compared to the state average. Okay. A decrease in the percentage in the proportion of couples without kids, an increase in the percentage of people that lived at a different address 5 years ago, which I think is the main one, and I'll come back to that shortly, and an increase in the proportion of professional females.
Okay.
But the big one is people that lived at a different address 5 years ago. Because for an area to increase in price significantly, you needed a new group of people, a wealthier demographic to move in. It's not like the people that move in there, suddenly they all get wage increases and property prices go up. It's people, wealthier people moving into an area that used to be undesirable, used to be blue collar, but mainly because of its proximity to the city, as in Paddington, or proximity to the water, as is the case with Balmain, and the historical or character buildings, they've become a great attraction.
Yeah, okay. I love that. We'll summarize those key metrics in our show notes as well, so people can jump on there. So you're saying that's easily accessible through ABS data then?
ABS, you just look at the community profile. Generally, quick stats will have a lot of that. Yep. But sometimes you have to open up the spreadsheets, which are called community profiles, in particular, say, to get professional female, proportion of professional female. But look, just because it doesn't tick all the boxes doesn't mean it's not gentrifying. You know, if it was doing this sort of work is both an art and a science. So it's objective and subjective.
Yeah.
And in the end, you can do all the work you want behind the computer, but you have to go out there and check it out. Like if people Google my name in gentrification, they'll find some articles that I've written. You know, I remember one of the classic ones was the ABC of gentrification. So A stands for alcohol. What sort of alcohol are they serving in the area? B stands for bikes. What sort of bikes are they riding? And C stands for coffee. So, you know, just a brief example. If they're serving coffee with oat milk, coconut milk, almond milk, all the other sorts of milk, then it could be gentrifying.
I think the only one you missed is macadamia, but yeah, we'll keep going.
That's right. Or, you know, if you go to a place and they're serving gin and Aperol spritz and all of these cocktails you've never heard of,
yeah,
as compared to a place that's only serving Tooheys Draft and VB, well, then you're probably in the gentrifying area.
Yeah, well said. I love it. Yeah, I've read some of the articles, and again, I think it's super, super important that if you're trying to keep an eye on areas that are going through that gentrification process, we'll include the cues for that as well. As going back to your journey and holding property, you've probably met a lot of investors that look back on their portfolio with a bit of regret, going, "Oh, I wish I bought more. I wish I didn't sell that particular property as well," which then talks about timing the market versus time in the market. And I've watched a video on the Pippa website as well about this, where you've done a whole deep dive through an Excel spreadsheet talking about trying to buy hotspots or particular areas that are doing well versus buying and just holding for the long term as well. And that's probably something that you're quite passionate about, talking about timing versus timing the market. Can you take us through your philosophy and a bit more about that as well, Pete?
The problem with trying to time the market, which means you buy in this area because you think it's going to be great, and then you sell. Then you buy in another area which you think is going to be great, and then you sell. It's those buying and selling costs, and the tax is a killer. And so if you look at that video that you mentioned, which I did for the Property Investment Professionals of Australia, it's only 16 minutes, but it shows the spreadsheet and it shows the calculations that I've done. And if we just get to the summary, if you had bought and sold, if you had bought and held in any one of the 8 capital cities of Australia, you would have made a profit. It just depends on whether you were, smart enough or lucky enough to buy in the best performing capital city or the worst performing capital city, but you would have made a profit. The problem with trying to time the market, unless you're some genius or you've got some crystal ball, there's almost a 50% chance that you, according to my stats there, that you are going to lose money. Not make any money, but after 15 years, you've actually got less money in your pocket. And so, and I've been, teaching in real estate and investment for almost 30 years. I've written a few books, and even the forecasts that I've made, they are not 100% perfect, because again, it's both a valuation and a science. Because you're dealing with consumer behavior, you can't predict it with 100% accuracy. So I think do your macroeconomic research, work out which capital city or cities are going to do best. Do your property economics research or your micro location research and pick the suburbs, and then just stick with it.
Well said.
Because once you get into the cycle of buying and selling, paying tax, buying and selling, paying tax, you just lose so much money on the way.
Yeah, I think this whole notion of trading properties is probably something that, we have a lot of buyers agents coming here, so I've got no qualms that, and being with Pippa, you probably see this, right? Where some are probably at that point where they have this trading philosophy around properties, where it's buy, get to the point that you're selling, sell it, move on, and then do something else. And I think that's one part of a portfolio. But if your view is this is a long-term game and you want to try and get to that passive income for your retirement, then the buy and hold method is possibly a really probably less intensive energy and time and cost perspective as well.
That's absolutely 100% correct.
Yeah. I think, what have I read? I don't know. I can't remember the stat. Maybe it's about 40 or 50% will sell within the first 5 years as well.
And I think a number of them will sell because they found the tenants from hell, or somebody else has found them for them. But what I say to people, look, you can get rid of the tenant from hell, but if it's a good solid property, just buy the bullet, get rid of them. Yes, it's going to cost you a bit of money, but if you upgrade it, hopefully attract a better quality of tenant, and then just hold it. And owning your own investment properties is like running a small business. You're going to have good days, you're going to have bad days. You just got to, but if you have a property manager, they can act as a filter for you. But in the end, there'll be good and bad.
Yeah, well said. One of your books here was Property versus Shares. And I guess people may say, look, you've got a certain bias towards property. Do you feel like they've got a place that they can complement one another as well? Or do you say pick a poison and stick to it?
Nobody should ask me about share picks, because all the shares that I bought are worth less than what I paid for them. So that's not
stick to what you know.
Right. There certainly is a place, like for young ones, the teenagers or the young adults that might be listening to this program, who may only have a few $1,000s saved. A few $1,000s is not going to get you into property, but a few $1,000s can get you into the share market.
Yeah.
So if you can buy yourself some blue chip shares or some good solid shares, that's going to increase in value far greater than leaving it in the bank, even though you can get pretty good interest in the bank at the moment. Traditionally, the share market has gone up over the last 100 years, 8 to 9% per annum. So you get that capital growth, plus you get the dividends. So if you can reinvest those dividends, in a few years' time, you'll have much more than if just putting it away in some sort of savings account. So certainly, shares have their place in life. Look, all of us are in super. The vast majority of it is in the share market, whether it's in the Australian share market or the overseas share market. But, one of the reasons I invest in property so that I can take control of my own destiny, whereas, my super fund, they take control over it. The only control I have is I can either put more in or take it out. Whereas with property, I have a lot more options.
No, that's fine. Well said. And I love the recent book that you've put out, which I think a lot of people are really now gravitating towards this type of vehicle for investing is small developments. And you've got the Diary for Small Developer. Take us through your philosophy. Take us through what the book entails as well, please, Peter.
All right. Well, so firstly, development doesn't necessarily mean build, because generally I have made more percentage profit on just buying land and subdividing it.
Okay.
And you don't have to subdivide into 20 or 30 lots, or subdivide into 2 and 3 lots. Because unless you are a builder and can build for a really good price, it's very hard for mum and dads to pay a retail price for building and make good money on selling the finished product. So generally, I will only build if I am keeping. And I generally keep for around up to 5 years, because that's the best depreciation. I know I'm not going to get a significant amount of capital growth once I've subdivided and I hold relatively new dwellings on small blocks. But the bonus of that is you'll get really good tax depreciation. Okay. And so I have only bought to hold, not forever, again, the 5 years, but I've finished my last development that I did is going to be my last development, because at 62, I don't want to be taking any more risks. And so I'll be holding that for the very long term, forever. Okay.
And so going through your journey as a property developer, what are some of the insights you've picked up, tips for new players as well, that you go, this is, what you don't know is what you don't know. And I've done some of that homework for you as well.
Yeah, look, so I wouldn't go from zero to property developer. I'd go from zero to property investor, and then property developer. Property development is not for everyone. You've got to work out what your goals are. If your goal is to either retire, let's say it's to retire richer, you don't need to develop. You should buy yourself 1 or 2 well-located houses and just hold on to them for the long term. And, you should be fine. Developing is for those people who are looking to give up their day job, or maybe want to work part-time, or are looking for some more excitement. But just remember, excitement doesn't always relate to making a profit. There are a lot of things in property development that we don't have to deal with in residential property investment. One is, probably the big one, is GST.
Yeah.
And the problem with GST, you've got to pay that whether you make a profit or a loss. And unlike property investors who've held a property for a while, they can halve their tax liability. As a property developer, you can't. You pay full tax. And it's a big risk. And one of the reasons is because, like, for a year, if it takes a year to build, for a year you got all this exposure, but you really got nothing to sell. Like, who's going to buy a half-built development? If anyone does, they're going to buy it at a bargain.
Yeah.
So, but the beauty about investment is the day you buy it, either that day or soon after, you'll have a tenant, and you'll be, earning an income straight away.
Perfect. We'll and I mean, you've done that with Margaret Lomas, who's one of the originals
the
in
queen,
this space.
Yes, I call her the queen of property investment. Yeah,
isn't it? One of the OGs.
That book's good. I mean, I think that they're all good, but that book's particularly good because it was based on 2 real-life developments, one in Adelaide and one on the central coast of New South Wales.
Beautiful, beautiful. I'll put you on the spot here. Do you reckon we get a copy of that to give away to a listener?
I think we can.
Oh, nice one. Lovely work. Thank you very much. It's and that's what I love about people like yourself, Peter. It's willingness to share your knowledge and also share your share what you're putting out there as well to more people. It's exciting. So what's the end game for Peter with your portfolio? What does that look like for you?
Well, I'm doing it right now, Aaron. Before, most of my life, or certainly all my working life, work was number one.
Yeah.
And then came, physical health and fitness. But now it's the other way around. Now it's because I don't have to work as much. I make sure that I get out and about. I'll go to the gym, go for a ride, go for a walk, get out in the fresh air, the sunshine. And then the beauty about retirement is, if you don't finish it today, you can do it tomorrow. And so, look, what's helped me retire at an age earlier than others, and I could have retired earlier if I wanted to, but I really love teaching. That's why I'm still doing some of it.
Yeah.
And that is, if you've got multiple properties, you can sell some. And if you're at an age where you can access your super, you put it into super. And then when it comes out, it's tax-free. But if you're too young and you can't access it from super, and I'm just going to use simple numbers here, all right? So let's say you're 50 years old and you bought a property for $500,000. By the time you're 60 years old, it turns out to be $1 million. You sell it, you got to pay capital gains tax. So you made a profit of 500. You only paid tax on half of it because of the capital gains discount. So you probably still finish up with 400. Well, when the average annual salary is 80,000 a year, that's the equivalent of 5 years pay. So you can, if you're 55, you're 60, instead of going to 65, you can finish work and then access, your super. Or if you want to keep working, you can go half time for 10 years. Just gives you up. So, I've done both. I've done the buy and hold for the long term, but also to sell property on the way to improve quality of life now, as well as in retirement. Like, I don't want to live like a pauper now to live like a prince when I'm in retirement, but I'd like to live well throughout my whole life.
Well said. I love the ethos, mate. And yeah, I think I've had a chat before earlier today talking about the importance of contentment and enjoyment. And I feel like when we're going through property portfolio, people building properties, it's the quantity, for example, or how quickly they're able to scale, where I feel like playing the long game and that enjoyment and contentment is probably something that doesn't get talked about enough as well. I'm like, there's something magical about that. You meet a happy investor, or you can meet a bitter investor, and they've got a very different vibe about them.
They certainly do, don't they? They're never going to invest in property again because they probably encountered the tenant from hell, or somebody sucked them into buying a really poor performing property and they lost money, and they're never going to do it again. Education is really important.
I agree, Matt. I really appreciate your time. Really appreciate your knowledge. Peter is a name that's synonymous in this space. We're super, super privileged to have you on this podcast. Like I said, we're going to copy one of those books to give out. And if you do want a copy, please feel free to reach out to us because we'd love to spread the word and the knowledge about what Peter's putting out there as well. So thank you very much, Peter. Really appreciate it. We'll include details to the property professor and some articles that you've also referenced there as well today.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Aaron. Pleasure to chat with you.
Wonderful. I'll see you around the Pippa Circles very shortly as well. And if you found this episode helpful, feel free to leave us a review, or better yet, drop us a note with some questions that you'd like answered in the future as well. That's a wrap for another episode. We'll talk to you soon. Thanks.